maintaining bone health while in isolation. I'd like to begin by acknowledging the traditional owners of the land on which we meet today. I would also like to pay my respects to elders past, present, and emerging. Thank you so much for joining us today. Now, if you aren't able to stay for the whole webinar, that's okay because you can access it later via our webpage at visionaustralia.org/, check in and chat. Today's webinar on maintaining bone health while in isolation, we'll be going through some really, really important things, such as how to ensure your bone health doesn't suffer during isolation, and why osteoporosis prevention matters in children, and the importance of keeping up with your children's physical activity. Now, we are expecting lots of questions today because it is an interactive session for you guys. So if you have any questions that come to mind, please send them through via the chat box, or if you're using a screen reader, you can access the chat function through the keystroke Alt-H. And also, if we're not able to get through any of the questions today, or if you have an unrelated question around COVID-19, please contact Vision Australia on our COVID-19 helpline 1300 88 70 58. I'm really, really excited to introduce my colleague, Imei Tan. Imei is a physiotherapist working at Vision Australia, and previously she managed the osteoporosis prevention program at Singapore Health Promotion Board, and osteoprevention is her PhD research topic. Hello, Imei. How are you going today?
I'm very well, thank you. How are you, Renee?
Really, really good. I know that this is such a challenging time for everyone, and why I find this topic is so important because it looks at our bodies and why. Tell us more. Why is bone health so important, maintaining that during isolation?
So we're all bunkering down at home. And so I think there has been a lot of changes. So let's talk about what's happening now that we're all in isolation in terms of our activity level. Hey, so now, firstly, the pretty obvious thing is that the temporary loss of access to exercise facilities. So we can't go to our gyms anymore. We can't access any outdoor exercise equipment, no classes, no tennis, no soccer games, etc. So which inadvertently decrease our physical activity level. So that's pretty obvious. But secondly, which I think is not any less important, or maybe it's even more important, is the loss of incidental physical activity. So when we are actually working at home and schooling from home, now what we have lost, if you think about your day before all this COVID-19 takes over our life, is you're walking from your car to work. Okay, or you're running around the office looking for the elusive piece of equipment or your elusive co-worker, yeah, and walking to the coffee van to get your caffeine break, or even jogging to a meeting because you're running late for the meeting, and that would be me. Right? So it's not just the time that we set aside for exercise, but it's actually the time that we're active on our feet. We are not even thinking about it, and it's not for the purpose of exercise, but just doing what we do. And that is going to have a huge impact on our overall physical health. So we're not just talking about bones, so cardiorespiratory, so muscle strength, mental health even. Now, I'm going to focus on bone health today because I think it's a big part of our body that is going to cop the biggest hit if we're not actually careful about that. And depending on the life stage that you're currently in, some of these changes, like for example, if this isolation thing is going on for a period of like 3 to 6 months, some of these changes may not be fully reversible. Okay, or for a different population, it may be a case of like lost opportunity.
Wow, I think my heart nearly skipped a little beat when you talked about some of the irreversible damage. So you did go into how some of the consequences of bone health
Yeah,
and how
we're
that.
talking. Yeah, we're talking probably more around osteoporosis. Yeah.
Yeah, and I understand. I don't have a huge amount of knowledge around osteoporosis, but I know that there are a lot of risks associated. Tell us more about osteoporosis, I may.
Yeah, so what I'm getting at is like we do need to make an effort towards preventing osteoporosis, which is not an event that may happen now, but it's something that we definitely need to do consistently about right now to prevent it later. Now, osteoporosis is when your bone become, I mean, simply put, weak and brittle. So it breaks easily with a minimal trauma. For example, you know, normally you bump into something, you're okay. When you fall, you just have a little bit of a bruise, but now it can actually result in quite serious fractures. So, and in very serious case of osteoporosis, it can just be a cough or sneeze that you can actually end up with a spinal vertebrae fracture, or it can just happen spontaneously just because it's so weak. So I'm going to share a visual now. Sorry, I'm just going to put that up and then share. Okay, hold on. Just let me get back to,
And while you're setting that, I may, if you
yeah.
are just joining us, thank you so much. You're joining our discussion around a really important topic around bone health. It's a very interactive session, so please send through any questions via the chat box, and we'll do our best to get through those questions during our sessions. Now, we've got this screen up now. I may take us through.
Yeah, so I think on your screen now you can see on the left, and that's with the dark background, that is a normal bone. So this is actually a visual taken under an electron microscope. So you can just see that in a normal bone, just to describe that to actually have an audio description of that, it's like a honeycomb that's very tightly packed. Okay, so you do have this whole complex matrix or structure very tightly packed. There's very little space in between, and everything is solid and dense, so you can't actually see through that. Now, on the right, that's the one with the red background. Okay, red signaling danger. I just like a bit of drama in it. Now, so it's an osteoporotic bone, and you can see, it's almost translucent. So there is not a lot of density in it. So it's lost that volume, it's lost that density, and also you can just see a lot of breakages in that honeycomb. So in that whole structure, it's very porous. So if you look at the term osteoporosis, osteo means bone, porotic means is porous. So that's exactly what it looks like. So I think another good way to look at osteoporosis as well is if you're actually, you know, you're sitting in a room right now in a building, and if you see any buildings that's going up, you can see a lot of scaffolding, a lot of these load-bearing beams in it that's holding it up. So we're talking about now these load-bearing beams, and they're hollow. You know, it's no longer solid, so the material is all giving way, and it's not laid the correct way, and some of it is broken. So yeah, and so you're actually ending up with a structure that is actually not very strong and viable.
It's
I'll just stop sharing the screen.
And so, in your experience, I may, during this time of isolation, where all those incidental activities such as walking, grabbing a coffee from your workstation or from your home, all those type of incidental movements help prevent osteoporosis. Is that right?
Yeah. Now, it's probably quite important to just have a bit more understanding, a little bit more about our skeletal system. If you look at it as this living organism that just needs feedback, yeah. So what a bone does is it actually what we call modeling and remodeling. That means that it actually breaks down. So the old bones gets removed, and then the new bones are being built all the time, every single day. That's happening. Right. So there are a few things that influence that, and one is nutrition. Okay, we're not going to go too much into that. I'll talk a little bit about that later. And the other thing is with the whole remodeling process, it's dependent on what information you feed your bone with, right? So if you were to be very sedentary, I mean, it's going to say, all right, this is what you need. So this is going to be your life story. So I don't need to be that strong. Right. So if you're quite active and you're on your feet, you're going around, you're feeding it information, it's going to say, okay, I know, okay, this is how we're going to lay your bones. So it's not actually about just bone cells production. So if you actually have a higher level of physical activity, and we're not even just talking about exercise definitely helps, but even the incidental activity, yeah, it is actually telling your bone structure, hey, oh, I think, you know, this person actually needs to be upright. So let's just lay the bones down that way, and let's just produce a little bit more bone cells to help cope with that.
Yeah.
Yeah, so yeah. So that's what it's about. So it's about feeding information to your skeletal system. And I think one of the best example would be our astronauts. And that has been the biggest challenge with keeping people out in space too long, because they all come back with the most horrendous bone mass, and that sort of bone mass is irreversible because they have a lot of challenges with creating that sort of a environment that you get gravity. Yeah, so getting up against gravity, that's very important. Like
Mm.
anyone who is actually bedridden for just a few days, and so there is a lot of evidence supporting that bone mass just drops dramatically. So even if you're just getting on your feet, recollecting what you do throughout the day before you're starting to work from home, and I think that that's going to be great help.
Yeah, I think that's so important how you have articulated the fact that in using that example of astronauts, where those just having that little bit of movement really does help protect our bones. And you have touched on around some of the importance of physical activity does play a huge part with bone health maintenance. What about nutrition?
Well, nutrition does play a big part. As in, we do need to make sure that we get enough calcium and vitamin D. Now, vitamin D, I'm not going to dwell a lot into that because yeah, we know that we need vitamin D to help the absorption. And because of my role more as a physiotherapist, so I'm just going to leave it to in a good hands of a dietitian or nutritionist. But what I can say that there are dietary guidelines about our daily dietary calcium intake. What I want to put out there is that we don't need calcium just for our bones. I think there is a general misconception out there that is, yes, when you're actually taking calcium, it is actually for your bones. We need calcium for everything we do, any muscle contraction, any movement we do, any our heart beating, okay, anything. And in our physiological function, we need calcium in it. And so I think in the event when your body needs to function and you're lacking in that calcium in the system, where are they going to look? They're going to look around and go, oh, hey, yeah, that's the bone right there. And so when in terms of survival, if they have to make a decision, they will be taking that calcium from your bone. So that's the scenario. And it's something interesting to think about, because then when it comes to nutrition, that consistency is key. Yeah, and that's because we have actually done, like in my research, we're actually looking at calcium consumption behavior as well. So it's not about, okay, every week, today is the day that I'm going to consume a lot of calcium, right? So that doesn't help because that's going to just go out when you go to the toilet. Yeah. So every day. So that's sort of keeping up with the level. And I think that right now I will get you to probably broadcast a link, and that's actually to the Osteoporosis Foundation. Osteoporosis Australia link, and they do have the recommended daily intake for calcium. I think in adults is between 1,000 milligrams to 1,300 milligrams, I believe that. Yeah. So, and for the older population or lactating women, that may be a little bit higher. So, yeah. And I think the other thing that came out to be quite interesting, and I just thought it would be nice to share, is that. A lot of people do think that, yes, I'm having a bit of this, I'm having a bit of that, they're all calcium rich food, right? I'm getting enough. But what we're finding with a lot of ladies is they lose out on volume, right? So a quarter cup of milk and also like a full glass of milk, that's a huge difference in your calcium. So when you actually start adding out the volume, you're not quite cutting it. Yeah, so my recommendation is, if think about something in your life that is going to be easy, quick and easy. We don't want to have to we don't want to have to think about, like, what do I have to eat now that's rich in calcium? It just doesn't happen with so many things you have to deal with. But it's just that one big thing that's going to hit at least 50% of my RDA, right? My
Yep.
recommended daily allowance. And the rest of it will come from your other food sources.
Yeah, so what you're
Yeah.
saying is that we supplement with calcium to prevent calcium from being uh, subtracted from our bones when our muscles or body needs it.
Yeah, and it will be for your bones as well.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But what about
Yeah.
the people who can't consume dairy? We've just got a question that's come through.
Yeah, well, there are a lot of different sources like there's non-dairy alternative. And again, I don't want to be going too much into that. We'll go back to exercise in a little while. What I'm saying is there are a lot of non-dairy alternatives. For example, interestingly, when I did the study on the women in Singapore, I think the major source of calcium is actually from green leafy vegetables and also from legumes, right? And those contain a lot of calcium as well. So I think that would be a good source to look at. So again, I think there is actually a whole list of calcium-rich foods that's being listed on the site, the Osteoporosis Australia website as well. So that contains a lot of information. But I'm just going to leave it at that. So my key message out there around nutrition is look at the volume. We have a lot of time at home now. So even if you keep a food diary, so you may realize that, oh, wow, I'm consuming all these calcium-rich foods, there are a whole range of them, but I'm losing out on volume. So what can I do about that? Yeah, so I'll just leave it at that. Yeah, just because I don't think I should be going too much into diet and nutrition. Yeah, and we just go back to talking about exercise, about what types of exercise is actually good for your bones and what you can do at home.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I think that's you've provided some really, really insightful feedback about an area that isn't your specialist field, and the importance of calcium and how we might go and find that. And the Australian Osteoporosis, what was that site? The Australian Osteoporosis
Yes. Yeah, I think it's Osteoporosis Australia. So
Osteoporosis
yeah, so
Australia.
I'll bring that up in a little while, and I'll
Great.
let you broadcast that. Yeah, okay.
I'd now like to move along and talk about more around some of the physical aspects that you just touched on. Now, we know a lot of children are being schooled from home, and a big shout out to all the mums and dads out there that are supporting their kids during this time at school. Now, you mentioned when we chatted earlier that this is a huge consideration in osteoporosis prevention. How is that, and isn't that something that typically happens to older adults?
No, well, osteoporosis is something that it's not put out there a lot, but that's what we're trying to get out there. Is osteoporosis has its origin in childhood. Right, so I'm going to share the screen, and I think the best way to actually explain that is to use a curve. I know it's a little bit stressful to talk about the curve now, but this is a good curve, okay? So it is a different curve that we're talking about, and this is a curve for all of us that we all have. So let's get out of that. Sorry, I'm just a little bit fiddly. So I'm just going to share my screen now, and I'm just going to get on to that second visual right there. Okay. All right. I hope everyone can see that there. Yeah.
So,
Okay.
yep.
All good. Now, so what's happening is like, so this is basically a representation. We have a curve right here. So just to have an audio description that goes up and then it comes down again. So there is a peak, right? So this curve actually represents our bone mass for our whole life. So all of us actually have a curve like that, and we're somewhere in there. Hey, so when we're born, we're actually born with this level of bone mass. And of course, as you grow as a child, it grows and then that goes up. Now, I'd like you to kind of think about your bone sort of as a bank. Yeah. So this bank, when we're younger, okay, when we're actually under about 20 years of age, this bank is saying, hey, look, you can save. You can come in with your bone money and you can actually bank it. Right. And but interestingly, during adolescence, okay, and from about 10, 11, 12 years of age, right up to when you're about 18 to 19 or even 20, that's the time when the bank actually says, hey, okay, now we are open for business. You come in and you bank as much as you like. Yeah. Okay. You have $1 million, we'll take it. You have $1 trillion, we'll take it. There is limitless capacity for them to actually get that bone cash from you. Now, however, when you get up to maybe age about 20, 22, or that age is still quite debatable, but typically people say that's around in your early 20s. that bank basically say, okay, now we're shut. All right, thank you very much. You've come with your bone cash, but we can't take it anymore. Okay, and
Oh,
so pretty much that's what we call the peak bone mass. So you can just see that curve going up gradually, and when the age is between 10 to 20, that is an exponential up increase. And of course, how far that goes up depends on your lifestyle. So if you actually have a child who is actually quite sedentary, not too much into physical activity, and someone with poorer nutrition and poor access to nutrition and not consuming a lot of calcium during that period of time, it's going to peak a lot lower. And you can have someone who actually, if they're involved in sporting activities, good nutrition, and that can peak a lot higher. So all our bone curve looks different. So the determinant will be what happens in that part of our life. So at the peak, the amount of bone mass that's stored in your body, that's called a peak bone mass, right? And that is what you have to last for the rest of your life. Okay, so now after that, look, it's not the end of the world if you kind of think, oh, gee, I don't think I have a great peak bone mass, because I think between the age of like 20, 30 plus, that is when, as long as you're still keeping up with your physical activity, good nutrition, that sort of typically plateaus. Okay, and from that phase on, what happens is the number of cells, bone cells that's being generated, it cannot keep up with those that's breaking down, and hence the decrease in the bone mass. Yeah. So if we're keeping up the activity, you can actually make it not, it kind of plateaus, so you don't lose very much there. Yeah. And but however, as you age, so when you get to the point past 40 years of age, when muscles start to weaken, and for women in that curve, you will unfortunately see a dip, right, at maybe about age 50. And that's the when we menopause. Unfortunately, that's an event that cannot be helped. So that's an event when you get hormonal changes that will lead to more losses in bone mass. So it doesn't actually do us a very big favor. So right there, you're going to expect that sudden drop, and it's inevitable. Okay, and that's what's going to sometimes plunge people into that threshold. So if you draw a line across there somewhere at the bottom, there will be a threshold where your bone goes below that threshold. Okay, and that's when your bone become osteoporotic. And of course, before you get there, there is low bone mass, and that's what we call osteopenia, right? So the key thing is to get that peak out, like in childhood and adolescence. And I think there are a lot of people, young people listening in, who's probably going, oh yes, there's something I can do about it. And to just drive that peak as high as you can, so that you have a lot more room to maneuver. So if you have an event in your life where unfortunately you've got to be sedentary for a little while, or for any reason, yes, that buffer is there. So I think International Osteoporosis Foundation has put out the statement that with a 10% increase in your peak bone mass can have prevent you up to 50% of your risk of actually getting an osteoporotic fracture.
wow,
Yeah.
that's quite a interesting stat around how your life could go in, or your body can go in quite a different way if you look after it versus if we were to neglect it. What kind of tips can you offer if there are any parents that are listening who have been restricted with making sure that their kids are active? What kind of tips or physical activity ideas do you have in
Yeah.
mind to share?
Yeah, so I'll talk about children, and because that's so easy, they can do anything as long as it doesn't endanger themselves or anyone around them. Go for it. High impact. So we're talking about solid impact, and they're young, they're nimble, the joints are absolutely healthy. So jumping, hopping around. So it's not just the walking. So if they're going out with a walk with you, get them to do one-legged race.
Mm.
With you, or not with you, with the dogs maybe. So just look after yourself. Yeah,
Yeah.
one, like get them to sprint around, get them to just run and jump. Yeah, so they can do that without a lot of consideration for our joints. Whereas, I mean, in the older population, people in my population, I think there are a lot of consideration. So I'm going to give you some really good options in a little while. But for a young person, the sky's the limit. So as long as you're not doing anything dangerous. But what I have to emphasize is it's got to be load bearing or weight bearing exercise. It's got to be exercise on your feet because you need that bang, that impact that's going to tell your bones, oh, yeah, yeah, okay, okay, I hear you. And then that continuous impact right then, they go, okay, this is what I'll do. And that's when you actually get that feedback to the body that, yes, let's just cash in. We need to actually get more bone cash into this bank and to build it up. Yeah. Okay, so I think it's actually quite easy with a young person. So anything on their feet, up there playing soccer, gymnastics, or anything like that. Um, and as long as they're on your feet, and I know that a lot of children are into swimming as well. But so between like if they're on their bike and they're swimming, make sure that you actually put some of that load bearing and weight bearing activities in there as well, so that not all of it is actually non-weight bearing. So if you think gravity, if you think weight, and if you think impact. Yeah? Okay. So I'm just going to unshare this screen now. Yeah, because so I'm coming back to talk about what kind of exercise, how do you feed your bone, like you're at home the whole day. Um, what can you do? So I'm just going to present a few different scenarios. Okay, so we know that
Just to
we're,
be clear, so you're
yeah,
stepping in, IMA, to do some activities, some
yeah,
physical
yeah,
activities.
yeah.
Okay. Yeah.
So in a little while, but I'm just talking about some scenarios. Like for example, I'm just going to give some general examples out there. Like the most common thing is when I get out there, I see families out there doing their walks. Yeah. Okay. So and a lot of people do tell me, hey, look, I go out there for my brisk walking. You know, I love to walk, but I hate running. Okay, because I say, look, get some impact in there. Why don't you jog? Do a little bit of jogging because your bone is going to get more from that feedback. Like for something like that. And I say, okay, great. So why don't you just do a little bit of interval training? Yeah. So you love walking. Let's just walk for 2 minutes or even 3, 4 minutes. Enjoy your walk, maybe for 1 minute. Yeah. Just break into a jog, right? It's only for a minute and you can count down out loud because you see that light at the end of the tunnel where you don't have to jog anymore. And then you stop, go back to your brisk walking. And after 4 minutes or, you know, whatever interval you're setting, you go back to doing your brisk walking. And if you can, a young person, sprint, okay, skip. If you have children with you, do a one-legged hopping race, yeah, and just get into that sort of interval where you are getting that little opportunity. So you're not actually extending the time, the duration, yeah. So you're actually just feeding in more impact. Now, it's not just about the benefit of impact to your bones. So when you do that sort of training, you know, it is actually great for the cardiovascular health as well because you realize that, yeah, my heart rate is going to shoot right up and that's going to hold it there for a little bit. So even when you go back to your brisk walking, you are burning more calories as well. Okay, so I'm not going to go into that part of it, but I'm just giving examples of what you can typically do. Yeah. Now, your
We do have a
bone.
comment. Sorry to cut you off,
Yeah. No
IMA.
worries.
We have got a question that's come through, and I do believe that you're going to get to it very soon. And
Yeah.
that's what activities would you suggest for mature age people?
Well, mature age people, I think it depends. Like when you get to mature age, that's when I'm a little bit more careful. I'll say okay. So if you do not have any injuries, no injuries to the knees or any concerns at all, no back injury, I so strength building, resistance. So unfortunately, from 40, the age of 40 onwards, so we do experience that your muscles actually get shrinking and they get smaller and you lose strength. Right. So we need to be able to build that up. So I would recommend weight training. Loading is actually a very good way to do it. So that's something that you need to actually do with a little bit of guidance, especially if it's inevitable that anyone at the age have some aches and pains. So you need to learn how to stabilize yourself and make sure that your technique is right. But there are ways, things that you can actually do right now to feed that information to your bone. So I'm just going to give you an example, because now the thing with bone health is the information that you feed to that, it doesn't have to be very long, but it can go in short bouts. So it can be just 5 minutes. So if you actually have a limit to the amount of time you can do it, so I'm suggesting that don't go long, go short and high intensity. So when you're actually waiting for your cup of tea to boil, you're like you're waiting for the kettle and you're actually waiting for the water to boil, making a cup of tea. So you can actually get up on your feet, right, and do a bit of skipping, right? If it's hard on your knees, okay, just bounce. So have your heels off and do that bouncing movement, okay? Skip onto one leg, skip on the next leg, okay? Make that a little bit quicker. Run on the spot, okay? They are just things that you can do. And what I'm going to show everyone today, because I've been thinking, okay, what is actually safe for me to demonstrate through this webinar? And I think it's just a pure act of sit to stand, and then maybe we can progress that to a squat. Yeah, because I think squatting is probably one of the easiest, and it doesn't require a lot of space. It can be very safe, and it's just something about it's just something about squat that's excellent for your hip bone, because that's probably the most vulnerable site for anyone with a weak bone structure. Is a lot of people actually have osteoporotic hip fracture. So when you actually squat, it's very specifically target the neck of the femur, okay, which is the part of the hip bone that is usually weak. Yeah. Now, what is the best way to do it? I'm going to turn my computer around, my Surface Pro around that way, so everyone can get a good view. Okay, so before I do that, so you need a chair, not on wheels. So if you're actually on a wheelie chair, or if you're on a fitball, anything that's moving, please find a solid chair, something on all four legs. Okay, this is not a good time to present yourself to ER with a tailbone injury. So
No,
okay,
certainly not.
yeah. So okay, and if you're on a couch, maybe if it's sitting too low, I recommend that you get up on a chair as well, because it's not easy to do it off a couch. Okay, so I'm just going to turn the screen around this way. Okay, all right. Oh gee, I'm going a little bit funny there. Hey, so it hasn't actually, can you see me there?
Okay, I think you have
Yeah,
gone, you've
I've
gone,
gone sideways.
yeah. So
Okay,
maybe if we
okay,
just
no,
get the screen back the way it was, and if you were
yeah,
able to take a step back, and then if
yeah,
we can audio
I
describe those
no
actions, we just
worries,
take
no
a,
worries.
yep,
Okay, so I'll just do an audio description. How about that?
yep, and I think we can take them through. That's great if you stand
Okay,
up like you are
good, good.
now,
Okay,
if you like.
so if you can sit, okay, if you're on a good chair, make sure there's not a lot of obstacles around you, okay, and it's a solid chair that's not going to run away. If you sit at the edge of your chair,
I'm doing
okay,
this with you, Ime.
yep,
I'm
no,
joining
no
you. Okay, I'm
worries.
on the
Okay,
edge of my chair.
yeah,
Okay.
I'll go really slow. So at the edge of your chair, like you're about to stand up.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, now what I'll get you to do is to just feel that the level, your toes, if you drop a pendulum from your knee now, right down, it should be at the tip of your toes. So in other words, your toes should not be tucked backwards. If it's tucked back, bring it forward so that it shouldn't be too far forward. Then if not, you can't stand up. It should be at the same level as your knees. Okay, we all got that? Yep.
Yep, that
Okay.
sounds good.
So your knee should be kind of just at a hip level, like as wide as your hips right there. Now, when you stand up, we're going to try to stand up now, but when you stand up, do not move that knee. You have locked that knee position in. Okay. So how do you stand up then? Now, just keep leaning your shoulders forward. So keep your back straight, but keep leaning forward, relax, trust yourself. At some point, you feel that, oh, my bottom is actually off the chair, and just go with it and stand up. Great.
It's interesting when you break it down, I made
Yeah.
the steps involved to get into that position.
Yeah. And how was that? Okay. And
Mm.
let's get back down again slowly. Okay. And again, don't push your knees forward and all the way down. Now, If you're finding that, oh, gee, my knees keep going forward, okay, actually have a little trick for you. If you just lift your toes off the floor, that will keep the weight on the heels, and that's exactly what we want. Okay, so just make sure that your knee is just at where your hips are, same as wide as your hips. So it can just go that little bit wider if you want it to. Okay, just lift your toes off the floor just a little bit, right? And lock that knee position in, okay? And now just lean right forward, right forward, right forward. And there's no way that weight can actually go forward onto your
Oh, that's
toes
good.
now,
I can really feel that.
right? And keep your
Yep.
toes up because it's going to keep your weight back, and lean forward, nose over toes. Okay, that's what we tell our children all the time, nose over toes. Hover a little bit above your chair. Really,
Oh.
and hang in there, and then just come out and just do another rep again. No one is expecting a pump class today, are they?
It's well, I managed to do about 90 what's it called, squats, but I reckon this was just as hard because of that balance and how you're forced to apply different weight bearing as you were going to different parts of the body. It's actually quite a good um, exercise that it seems like a lot of people might be able to benefit from.
Yeah. So typically, if you think about, okay, maybe during a commercial break, you know, if you're catching something on Netflix, well, I think Netflix doesn't even have a commercial break, or you know, or something that will get into your routine. That
Yeah.
when you're having a break, okay, maybe 10 squats, and then just run on the spot. Okay, hop onto one leg, hop onto the other to the other leg, and if you actually get up, sorry, Rainy, I'm actually making you work hard today. I didn't give you any warning beforehand.
No,
So if
that's
you,
okay. I've got my deodorant on. Let's go.
yeah,
Let's sweat it out.
right. So if you actually get up on your feet now,
Yep.
so after finishing those squats, okay, and if you just hop onto one leg, okay, and hop onto the other. Okay, now for those of you who need to hold on, so it may not be for everyone. If your balance is not great, okay, you can do that starting holding on to something, right? Or just make sure that there's something around you that you can hold on to. Okay, and just now, when you hop onto the other leg, lift the opposite knee up a little bit and just other side. Okay, and let's make that a little bit quicker. And let's do that 10 times, like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, and 10. Yeah. Okay. And then you can kind of go, oh, maybe I can hop twice on that single leg. So onto the right leg, hop, hop, and the left, hop, hop, and right, hop, hop, and the left, hop, hop. So if you can't take off the floor, yeah, if you land, it hurts your knees. So just do a bit of a bounce.
Yep.
Okay. So it's just something easy. That's the kind of impact that we're talking about. So if you go onto that, it doesn't take more than 5 minutes.
Now, what
And
about you? I've got the question from Karen that's come through,
yeah,
and Karen's asked, "What about your knees when running?" Because obviously, I think Karen's implying to the impact. Is stationary cycling a good exercise without the pressure? And that's from Karen.
yeah. Now, again, we would like load-bearing exercise, and there are a lot of options. So, for example, squats. So we do have a lot of ladies, and it may not be the knees. It may just be, I think, for a lot of ladies after having a few children, a lot of them are saying, "Oh, gee, these are the kind of exercise that's going to impact on my bladder control and so on as well." So there are a lot of options. Okay, so I'll say weight training. Okay, and basically, if you have a particular knee issue and you love to run, check it out with a physio. Maybe there's something they can do about that to address that problem. And it just depends on your age. Really, I think that sort of slow jogging, you should be able to do that until you're fairly advanced in your age. And if you want to continue doing that and you find that that's a limiting factor, check in with your physio. And so contact, we have physios at VA who can actually help you with that. But if you are saying that, oh, gee, I hate running, you have a lot of other options. You can dance. Okay, you can do a lot of different things. You can do your Zumba, you can dance, or you can just do strength training. You can do squats. So there are a lot of options out there. So if it's for someone who is over 40 years of age, I highly recommend that they do quite a bit of that loading, as in like squatting. And once you get a technique right, is to get a lot more loading into it, so you can add weights. onto
A-
that.
And can
Yeah,
I ask, I've got a question that's come through from Courtney.
yeah.
What about turning toes out? Does that help?
No,
Oh,
no,
that's a
yeah,
flat,
yeah,
hard no there,
yeah,
Courtney.
that's right. So we have to just be a little bit careful with that because I think that's the kind of posture that you get a lot. I hope there's not a lot of personal training out there. Um, yeah. So we have been cautioned with experts in musculoskeletal that in that area, the physios are saying that just be cautious because I think that's what they do a lot in the gym. You see that very, very wide stance, toes pointing out, and I always cringe when I see that. So, yeah, and again, check in with the physio. Now, with the squats, it's something that's easy to teach. However, if you do have, just a note on that, if you kind of go, I've been told I have a flat feet. Yeah, and my feet turn in. And if you notice that your knees are turning in all the time, so it may just be that you need to be taught how to adjust it, or maybe it's a matter of getting some support or orthotics, or maybe you do need to be a bit mindful about how you align your joints when you do a squat. So not everyone squat the same way. I think we all do can get that basic technique right in that direction, but what happens in your foot mechanics is quite different. So if you kind of go, oh, gee, if your knees are hurting when you do that, if you feel that my feet is not supporting me well, they're turning in, my knees are turning in, get someone to have a quick look at that. Okay. Now, the other thing that I do want to mention that's really, so do not neglect your upper limb, right? So any chance you get, grab some weights, do some pumps in the air, okay? And I think something that's really easy to do, you can do anywhere, as long as you can find a wall, you can get some load bearing through your wrist and you can actually do your push-ups. Now, I think Colles fracture is something that's very common in middle-aged women, is that when they fall on an outstretched hand, and it leads to quite a bad fracture, and it's actually a very common fracture in the wrist. Can lead to quite a lot of deformities as well. So that's a very common one. So don't neglect your upper limb. Push-ups off the wall, push-ups off your bench top, push-ups on the floor. If you can get to that, as long as you have a surface that's not moving and very stable, you can push up on that.
Some really great tips around how you can actually use your home space to keep fit. We've actually come to the end of our session, and before we wrap up, if there was 3 tips that you would give to our listeners today, what would they be on maintaining bone health while in isolation?
Okay, so the tips will be that consistency. All right, so it's not about duration. So it's you feed your bone information consistently. Just look at it as this child who just needs to be told what to do. Okay, so simply on the day, like for a few days in a row, if you're just lying there and you're not on your feet, you can just imagine like this a contractor coming with a pile of bricks and say, I haven't been told where I'm going to lay them, so I'll just go, okay, boom, I'll just scatter that everywhere. So instead of building up where you have the line of stress where it needs to be load bearing, this is what's going to happen. So they
So
need
that
that
can,
information every day.
yep.
And if they don't get that information, that sort of haphazard laying of your bone cells, it happens almost immediately. Yeah,
Yeah.
so that consistency, and it doesn't take a lot, even if you just have about 10-15 minutes every day. And
And number 2, sorry, we
yeah,
just do have to wrap it up.
yeah,
So we
yeah,
got the
no,
first
yeah,
one around consistency, and I'll add to that.
consistency,
And I'll add
and
to that by saying you mentioned around incidental activities as well, which is really useful. What's the
yeah.
second tip that you would give? Just a
Now,
quick snapshot.
yeah, any opportunity where you can actually add impact into that at your activity, go for it, especially when you're out exercising, and especially for children. Remember the peak bone mass. And the third is please do not neglect your nutrition. Okay, so I do have that website here. So I'm trying to just get that web link up to you. So it is www.osteoporosis.org.au. Yeah,
That's
so
wonderful.
Yeah, okay, so there's a lot of information in there. And the other thing that you may want to go on to is International Osteoporosis Foundation site. They have published a really good information. It's called Invest in Your Bone. It's all about peak bone mass and building that in children and adolescents.
Thanks so much. Some really great resources there. And the other resource that I do want to point out as we wrap up is Vision Australia's COVID-19 helpline. And that number is 1300 88 70 58. Before we close, I did want to remind any of our listeners that Vision Australia is offering services via telehealth, which is conducted through phone, video conferencing, email, or a combo. You can contact our AT help desk if you'd like to get support in getting set up for telehealth. Give us a bell on 1300 84 74 66. That number again, 1300 84 74 66, or send us an email at information@visionaustralia.org. The next check-in and chat session is about exploring the world by touch. And that's going to be on Tuesday, the 28th of April at 11 a.m. for those residing in New South Wales, Vic, Queensland, and Tas, and 10:30 a.m. for those in South Australia and Northern Territory. And bit of an early rise for people in Western Australia. It's going to start there at 9 a.m. And we've got the amazing Christy, who's the orientation and mobility specialist at VA, who'll be taking us through. May, thank you so much for today's session. You have just provided a wealth of information around getting active, staying fit, gravity, calcium, and maximizing exercise, particularly when you're young. So all those young people out there and parents listening, please get out there and do that interval training and having that impact. I certainly learnt a lot, and I hope our listeners did too. We've absolutely loved chatting with you today. Thanks so
Thank
much,
you. My
everyone.
pleasure. Bye.
Bye.